run for president. Girl, you know it's evident. Let's look at the evidence. Girl, you are a queen. It's all in your blood. I'm black, African queen. Baby, you the answer. Uh.
Okay, so we are transition in, and I want to first of all welcome everybody to Anti-Black Conversations. And so this is one of our impromptu conversations that is a prelude to the exposing the prison industrial complex. So we've been doing a series of dialogue. Surrounding exposing the prison industrial complex. And tonight, what we want to do is break down some of the blah, blah, blah of the language and the narrative around it. So my name is Toni McNeil. I am the founder, host, I don't know, whatever the term is that you want to call it, for Anti-Black Conversations. And Anti-Black Conversations, it's a space where we have a transformative, transparent dialogue that is intentional to expose anti-Blackness, racism, white supremacy in the way that we as Black people in the Black community see ourselves, see each other, and how we process information. So God always know, right? There's whiteness in Black folks as well, because we can't help it, because we are steeped in a system and a society that is rooted in white supremacy. So we're going to dive in. I want to say a thank you to my guests that came in this evening, because they're the ones that are the experts that are going to be helping us draw some of these parallels and break down the blah, blah, blah in the language. So what I'm going to do is I just want to popcorn it around. And so, Anthony, I'm going to start with you. If you could just give a quick intro of who you are, and what makes you an expert. Let me do it like this real quick. An expert is someone that has experienced, has had 10,000 consecutive hours served or in a thing. In other words, I'm a mother, and 10,000 hours would equate to, let me get some of the external noise out. So 10,000 hours equates to 1.14 years. I want to make sure y'all with me on that. So 10,000 hours equals 1.14 years. Anyone that has consistently or continuously leaned into a thing for over 10,000 hours, the scholars say that makes you an expert in a thing. So as you introduce yourself, what I would like you to also do is to share what time frame makes you an expert in the breaking down of the blah, blah, blah when it comes to the prison industrial complex. Anthony, we take you off of mute.
That's interesting. I appreciate that. Anthony Robinson Jr., Executive Director of the Echo Chamber, right now transformative consultant, also concrete team member, right? California Justice Leader, AmeriCorps member, like a few other hats, Time Done 209 organizer, had to lift those things up, mostly proud of those. I'm glad you gave us a number or a measure mark at 1.4. It's interesting. 1.4 equates to 10,000 hours to expert in something. Just doing some rough math. I did 20 years in prison, so being an expert in transformative justice, reentry, right? Having to transition my mind from a criminal thinking mentality, right? From an antisocial dynamic to a pro-social dynamic that basically allowed me to not only survive in prison, but thrive in prison and do it in a principled way, standing tall to be a role model and example for other folks. And that also was a platform to allow my expertise to also work out here in society. So I would say that.
All right. So when you were sharing, and I'm sorry I got distracted because I needed to do a technical thing. Did you share also time served?
Yes, 20 years.
20 years. Okay. So the first year made you an expert. Okay. And the other 19 was gravy. All right. And on top of all the rest of the stuff. Okay, got you. Okay. Appreciate you. As you would say, Ashe.
That's right.
Sal, introduce yourself and what makes you an expert. And an expert can come time served or time worked with people that have served time.
For sure. So Cell Blog, Marcel. I'm an organizer at Faith in the Valley in Fresno. Been doing game prevention, intervention, reintegration work for 15 years. Also newly TA with the Advanced Peace Fresno Project. So I do a lot of work working with what they say the most lethal population in our city. So what makes me an expert? I mean, I don't think I'm an expert, right? So I think that what makes me an expert is I've been black all my life, black male all my life, and so like just the narrative growing up was I was end up dead or in jail, and so having to navigate that since I think maybe 8 or 9 years of age and processing that, processing that, and being in context with like a lot of family and friends were going in and out of jail. My father did time, and so I'm deeply immersed like in that experience. On the other hand, I think I began pro-black black liberation studies in the year 2000 in Xavier in New Orleans, and so for the past 20 years I've delved into this topic theologically, sociologically, and philosophically, and so I got a little bit of a balance there. I don't know if I'm an expert, but I got some experience. I got the 10,000 hours. So by your definition, I got a little bit. Maybe I'm an expert.
All right. I appreciate you. Thank you super much. And so, London, if you could introduce yourself and just give us a little bit about your background so that we'll know what makes you an expert.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Ms. Tony. Thank you for allowing me into this space and doing this. So my name is London Crowdy. I did a little bit over 8 years in a federal prison system, and I'm currently an organizer at Faith in Action East Bay. But I started, my home was Legal Services for Prisoners with Children, All of Us or None. And I'm also the co-founder of an organization called Unapologetically Hers, which is an organization that is ran by all formerly incarcerated women. And we believe in bringing attention and bringing awareness to the specific needs that women need in the system and coming out of the system.
Awesome. So you're an expert then in the prison industrial complex, and also then there's a specialty there when it comes to women in prison. And so I'm asking that question intentionally. I know that we struggle with saying that we're an expert in a thing because white supremacy has said we have to have a PhD, a doctrine. And so I'm stay in and I'm gonna stay lit and I'm gonna stay there. And so because of that, then we don't give ourselves permission to actually credential ourselves appropriately as a people. So I'm intentionally drawing some lines there and saying then because you are a woman that has served time, that 8 years then, so that then gives you not only expertise when it comes to the prison industrial complex, but it also then gives you a specialty when it comes to the prison industrial complex as it pertains to women. That's a question.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for Ms. Tony for that. So I will say that I am I guess, when you say the expert, I do also feel like that, I say that, I guess, in a humble way, because I feel like no two persons' time is alike, it's, and they can't really be put in a box. Like sometimes people think that all formerly incarcerated people go through the same things, but I will say that I'm an expert in just what I've been through and just lifting up and making sure that I bring, women into the conversation, support the men, but definitely intentionally supporting the women and bringing them more into the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you. And I appreciate that and respect that, because a lot of times people that have book knowledge don't necessarily have the shaping of a narrative that says that when they'll bring book knowledge in that gives them an expertise over the entire situation. But then when you are personally encountering things, you also come in there with the humility of being able to say, but I can't speak for everybody because everyone's experience is not identical to what my experience is. So I appreciate you saying that. Ken, welcome. to the Anti-Black Conversation. Welcome to the space, all of that. And so, yeah, introduce yourself. Tell us what makes you an expert.
Yeah, it's an honor to be here. I appreciate you having me and being able to share this space with the wonderful brothers and sisters on the panel. If the conversation, my name is Ken. If the conversation is about anti-Blackness, then you could say I've been an expert for 53 years, right? Because I was born a Black man child in America. And I spelled America with a K. And I felt like I've grown up in a country, in a state, in a city that didn't like me from the moment I came out of my mama's womb. So from that standpoint, I guess you could say I'm an expert because I've lived it and I still live it every single day. If we're talking about systems of mass incarceration, I'm probably expert there too, because I've been a slave of the state underneath the 13th Amendment in the California Constitution since I was 15 years old, which is when I first was admitted to the state in Los Angeles. And I've spent over 30 years in the system in California. So if 10,000 hours makes me an expert, then I'm probably a grand expert at this point. In reference to political awareness, consciousness, I'm probably an expert there too. If we count it to be 10,000 hours, I've probably had conversations with every Black scholar in the world at one point or another vicariously through readings and studying of our history here and our history in the diaspora, in the motherland. So, you know, I don't go around calling myself an expert, but if we're using your definition, then, you know, I'm qualified to get in the conversation probably, right? So that's why I'm showing up. I was asked to be here, and any contribution I could be, and anything I can learn, I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. And I super appreciate that. And it's not my definition of expert. It's actually a white scholar's definition of an expert, which is why I used it in an anti-Black conversation space. You know, so yes. Anyway, I'm gonna back off of that.
I'm glad you used it, because I think like even me, like, you know, you talk to be twice as good, and you know what I'm saying, like be twice as good to get half as much, and you can't ever boast about it. It's like it triggers something. Like, man, we can't say we experts. We got to be humble when we move in this world, you know, but we got to show them that we better than them. So I know why you did that. So I appreciate it.
Yes, and I have to as and so for myself, I'm an expert. And so I've never been incarcerated. I'm an expert on what it is to actually be a partner of individuals who are incarcerated. I'm an expert of how I have to engage with family who is incarcerated. And I am an expert on what it is to be a Black woman that has had Black men snatched out of the community and has to raise my children in the absence of the Black man and the Black father and the Black example due to incarceration. And I'm an expert in a whole bunch of other stuff that we could talk about, but that would be a different path that we take. And so now that we're done doing that, and I'm not going to do it in a place of false humility, say that too. I'm learning how to actually put my crown on and shine all my jewels and stuff the way that other folks get to do when they have degrees and stuff. So now we're fixing to dive deep into this conversation. This is an impromptu conversation, which means typically I do marketing, you know, and let people know. This night was an impromptu one, which we reserve the right to in an anti-Black conversation space. It is because we need to break down the blah, 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 blah of these these lines, these parallels. When you hear the term modern day slavery, first thing that I want to do, let's just throw that out there. Modern day slavery. What is it? What are we talking about? We say modern day slavery.
Well, if I can chime in and take a stab at that, I think that the first thing we have to understand is context. Because if you understand the Constitution and you look in your own state's Constitution, assuming we're all from California, it says that you're a slave, or you're subjected to being a slave if you've been convicted of a crime. So the moment that the judge hits his gavel and convicts you of a crime, then you've now become a slave of the state. In reference to these folks' definition of what a slave of the state may be. In an economic context, I guess you could look at it as if you're being forced to work in order to subsist or in order to exist. And in many cases, people that suffer from economic impoverishment or lack of economic opportunity, who have to go out and work for minimum wage and, low wages, unlivable wages, that almost qualifies you to be a slave of the state, because you're actually having to work just to survive, just to be able to have a roof over your head. During chattel slavery, which we're most familiar with, right, from our ancestors, those things were provided for us for toil. We were forced to work, but then clothing was provided, food was provided, housing was provided. All of the basic necessities to allow us to be able to work were provided for us. So when chattel slavery ended in 1865, allegedly, all that did was transfer over responsibility of how you're going to clothe yourself, how you're going to house yourself, how you're going to do all that. And you had to go to work in order to get those things. So if you look at it from an economic standpoint, many of us, if you don't fall into the 5% or the 1% or maybe the 10%, are still slaves, because once you deduct from your salary the basic things you need to exist, you'll find out that you're left with very little.
So then, by definition, either Sel or Anthony, by definition, what is slavery? Just by definition. And look, here we Google it. Somebody
You want to take it?
Let me Google.
We're speaking about. Essentially at a service level, we're speaking about the forced labor, right? But at a deeper level, we're speaking about the commodification of people's bodies, right? So when you talk about like what is modern slavery, for me, what I register is like the school to prison pipeline and the prison industrial complex, right? Like how in California, the prison budget is designed by how well you test in your reading scores by 8 years of age. So at 8 years of age, if you are reading at grade level, they're preparing your body to be a commodity or award of the state, right? To be owned by the state, to be owned by the federal government, in which they're going to create, in which the whole economy has been created around your incarceration, your imprisonment, right? So I think that it's the system that commodifies people's bodies, and this allows them to operate freely and fully and autonomously in the world.
Can you tell me what this, and now remember, this is breaking down the blah, blah, blah. So all I'm going to do is to make us go a little deeper and a little deeper and a little deeper into defining things. Mm-hmm. When you say to commodify, what do you mean?
It's to literally make somebody a product. The little, the black boy or the darker body person at who's 8 years old and can't read, your body has now been marked to take $100,000 from taxpayers, in 10 years, when you get to prison, because now your body is a product, it's ward of the state, and we've allotted $100,000 to take care of you when we seize you, right? So you are a product that we will eventually seize, and we will create an economy to keep you sustained or to keep you suppressed.
Okay. Anthony? Sorry, I thought about my grandson just now. I'm sorry. I had to come back really quick.
Lord, take a breather. Now, when I look at the term modern day slavery, for me, it just reminds me of like how they continue to perpetuate, or how on our watch how the system hasn't really changed from the inception of slavery. Like when you talk about modern day, it's like we assume as if it's taking a new form. But as all those transitions and all those forms that's taken, there's been a cultural shift that like stuff was happening. Like we were in that process, right? So you talk about historic context. And when I look back at what slavery was, as the brother Marcel was speaking of, it's always been about commodities, because the whole institution of slavery thrived off the premise of cheap labor. How can we get cheap labor to do the hard manufacturing work to build the industry? So when you talk about the prison industrial complex, it's been the same shift. It's been the same shake and bake handoff. You're in prison and you're exploiting folks for cheap labor for industry. It's the perpetuation of industry. That's why this thing has become an industrial complex. You come from slavery, when you think about its origins, it came from the agrarian state, when folks was literally tilling and working the land. in prison, most prisons is still operating on that. You talk about prisons out south of Mississippi where they're literally farming and they're doing that sharecropping type work, right? And it's like it's been the same handoff. So when I hear the term modern day slavery, it for me, just being a conscious Black man, it reminds me and it also motivates me. Like, well, wait a minute, like the slavery system, like as the brother stated, the 13th Amendment states, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist except as punishment for a crime. So when I hear modern day slavery, it's like, oh, it shows me how they vouchsafe the institution of slavery. Whether you call it modern, old form, slavery is slavery, right? Like the modern day slavery doesn't feel more freeing than the old slavery. Like slavery is slavery, right? So it's like, it allows us an opportunity to recognize and be accountable. Like, okay, wait a minute, on our watch, we're not allowing this institution, whether they continue to commodify it and modernize it and tweak it and adjust it, they're adjusting it to our culture, they're adjusting it to our language, they're adjusting it to our perceptions, they're adjusting it to our appetites, right? So we sat at the table while they ushered into this institution of slavery, why they vouchsafed it in the Constitution. We sat at the table and allowed that to pass through for our watch as if it's not being handed down to our progeny, to our generations, right? So that's the thing that kind of awakens me and enlightens me when I hear about modern day slavery. Like, oh, that institution is still existing on our watch. Like how are we comfortable with that?
So I looked up this definition and I pulled this one in particular, and so anyone can tap in on this. Slavery. So the definition, by definition, the practice or system of owning slaves. Slavery is the practice or system of owning slaves. So what I want to do is I want to break down, first of all, who are the slaves?
Well, in the purpose of this context, I know we're talking about African Americans, right? But we also know that brown people are in prison at rates higher than Black, or at least in California. And I just want to make a distinction to what we've been talking about, because I don't want to minimize what our ancestors went through. And I don't think that any of us have experienced the trauma and the torture that happened to our ancestors in the same way. So I'll say that off the dribble. The second piece to that is that I think that there's the economic piece to slavery, which is what the South was about, and owning Black bodies and commodifying Black bodies, as the other brother said. But then there's what happened after the Civil War, which was the neutralization of the slave, right? Because that's when you had Reconstruction. That's when you had the Black Code. That's when you had Jim Crow. That's when you had Bull Connor of the South. That's when you had what happened in the 60s and 70s with the Panthers and the Black Liberation Movement. That's what you had with the crack era. That's what you had with systems of mass incarceration. All of those things that happened starting at about 1866 were to neutralize Black bodies, right? And so it really didn't become necessarily about economics in the same way. It shape-shifted and really became about how do we neutralize these Negroes.
And when you say neutralize, Ken, what do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean?
What I mean by that is to stop or block the empowerment of, right? Because what happened in the South is we outnumbered white people. We outnumbered plantation owners, right? There was 4 Blacks to every 1 white in the South. And what happened is Blacks started to take over political power. We started to gain office, and we started to have a lot of economic and political control in the South, which is why they invented the Black Codes, which was if you caught without a job, you can go to the prison and get leased back to the prison leasing system. If you were loitering or said hello to a white woman, you can get arrested, and now you have a felony. In come the 13th Amendment. We're going to create a litany of laws, right, that today are less than misdemeanors, to arrest Black men specifically, Black women too, but Black men specifically, to block them from being able to gain power in the South. So these were tools and mechanisms to neutralize Black bodies or Black empowerment, right? And we've seen for the last century and a half, this has been a continual process, a shape-shifting process. As the brother mentioned, it always changes forms. That's the danger of reform versus revolution. Reform just allows you to put a Band-Aid on it and change up the ways that you do it. So just like what we're seeing now with what happened in the summertime with Breonna Taylor and everybody else, and the calls for police defunding and everything else, all we're doing by saying restructuring stuff is allowing them to regroup and rebuild. And we will revisit these same issues 5 years from now, 7 years from now, the same way we did Rodney, the same way we did anybody else, because we're constantly calling for reform. And so reform allows you to just shape shift. It allows you to fix it, get back in the lab, redo it, put the whoop on it, whatever you want to call it, and come anew. And that's what's happened since the physical economic piece of slavery. I agree that there's an economic component to the prison system, but the prison labor is not producing massive amounts of wealth the way it did with the tobacco fields and the cotton crops in the South. I mean, what's being produced in the prison industry with desks and tennis shoes and all that shit, that's not making any money, right? What's making money is the neutralization of Black men from their communities, Black women, also, right? Taking them out of the community and neutralizing that power base, that power block, which destroys Black family, it destroys the family unit, it destroys communities in 1,000 different ways. It allows these other nationalities and groups to come in and exploit our communities specifically. And I'm not against any other nationality or race, but they come set up shop in the Black community and they take the Black dollars out of our community and they take it to their community, right? And so that's all part of the process of neutralizing Black economic base, Black family base, Black power base, et cetera, and so forth.
Yeah, it also has a legislative economic impact, right? So, like in California, they allot $11,000 per student in a school. They allot $75,000 per inmate, right? So legislatively, you have these budgets being created that are allocated toward, like you say, suppressing and removing like an economic drive or force from the Black community. And we've justified these Black men, these Black women, or these darker bodied people's incarceration to the masses, and it's down their narrative that says we have to spend billions of dollars to keep these people, these savage people, right? It's just about how they justified it, tamed and controlled in these carceral systems that we've created, right? So it's like this shift of money that never even gets into the economy. Like before, with the stroke of a pen, billions of dollars go towards suppressing darker bodies.
If I could just say one,
if I may,
I don't want to interrupt you. I just want to remind us to be conscientious of language. I mean, us in the criminal justice reform movement don't like to be called inmates. That's the white man's term for calling Black and brown people. And so I would invite us to use humanizing language because we are community members, whether we're there or here.
What's alternative?
The alternative is community member. Formerly incarcerated person, community member. Same thing you call everybody else.
Returning citizens. But yeah, incarcerated person is fine.
No, and it's good. And I'm gonna tell you why this is good and it's helpful, because if I told earlier today, I was saying London, that I've been drinking the Kool-Aid. I've been drinking the Kool-Aid, through the narrative that I've been fed and given for many years. So I speak what it is that I've been hearing and what I'm saying, and then I have to train and condition myself to speak and say something different and differently. So when I ask the question like that, it is with great intentionality, because I am literally saying that I have to reprogram my mind to actually hear, process, and receive something that is different, because my mind has been conditioned to see your bodies in a specific kind of way. And I have to be honest with myself about that. And be honest with myself about the fact that I'm blown away, London, that there are so many women in prison, and I'm blown away that I'm a woman and was none the wiser. That we're not even paying any attention.
Step in for a second. I just want to say that that's the love right there, right? The way that we were able to educate one another and correct one another in love without anyone, being other than what it's supposed to be, is us edifying one another. Like, I just want to say that was beautiful, and I'm glad that was happening, like, for other folks to see, because that's how we're supposed to be with one another. But just more of like back to like kind of pouncing on what everybody else was saying about like modern day slavery. I think that it shows up too in just like the simple things, like us who, for folks who haven't dug deep into our history and become, learn where they came from, reading, about our ancestors, et cetera, the struggle, the Black code and everything. Modern day slavery is also the education system right now, how they oppress our Black community. And we know that, the fundamentals on what this country was built on, but still it's like it's like the elephant in a room that we're not allowed to address, or when we address it, it's just thrown out. It's the projects, it's our communities, it's how you all were speaking on, like even with myself, right? How I believe the brother was saying how, Black people our mentals is conditioned to, only take up so much space, it's how we treat one another. It's how, I see oftentimes in the Black community that we will go out of our way to make other people feel comfortable, to make sure, other people's needs, but we won't do the same things for ourselves sometimes. Other folks are not. So, whether it's Latin community, the Indian community, the Asian community, they have pride, and sometimes we are very apologetic about our pride at times. I'm glad to see, I feel like since coming home, that it seems like the younger generation, it seems like they're on this whole vibe where it's becoming more, to embrace, our natural hair, the beautiful skin, brown pride, Black is king, etc. But it's those little things that we do on a daily that is attached to us, that we nurture, that we hold on, that we built into, like we raise in our household, we teach our children, and we don't even realize that it's colonialism, like it's the colonized mind, and it's like this generational curse. And so, yeah, I believe that those are all parts of modern day slavery.
I appreciate that, and I really really do. This is way broader than I even can imagine. This just taps into almost every major area of our lives on a daily basis. I wanted to lean into the narrative, and I just shaped it around the slave narrative then and now, because I mentioned that there is a way that I have been conditioned to see you. And so when I see you, when I'm saying I see you, I'm not meaning even just see you, in this space. Now, when I say see you, when I look at the young man, who, I don't see the young man who is on the other side of the weapon, who is pulling the gun. I don't see him as a victim. I see him as the villain. And that means then that, and I'm not taking away from, and I hate the fact that I even have to, that I even am struggling to frame it in a way that is socially acceptable. I, in my heart, believe that the victim is on both ends of the weapon. However, our society has conditioned me to not see that the person that is on the side that pulled the trigger is a value, that he's a criminal, that I ain't even gonna draw it out. So like the sale, I'm gonna drop it on you and just let it.
Is that universal though? Because I know we had the white boy went to the church and shot people up, and he got Burger King before he went to jail, right? Like he was, like, in the eyes of law enforcement society, he was a victim, right? Now he's vulnerable, he's gonna lose his life. But if you made any black boy, Tamir Rice, who has a play gun or whatever, and then he's automatically a villain because he was assumed to be a villain before police even got there, right? And so I think. My thing is, I know Ken mentioned it earlier, in a post 13th Amendment abolitionist space, white supremacists had to redefine structures in order to sustain the hierarchy. Like, how do we now maintain our position at the top of the totem, at the top of the food chain, when the system has now been ripped from us. And so they go back and they say, you know, we justified this system by saying that the people that we were bringing over here were savages, that they were uncivil, that they were untamed, that they needed us to save them, and this was the methodology that we were going to use to save them. And so that structure gets crippled or ripped away from them. And so to sustain their power, they say, all right, we're going to reclassify these darker bodies people as pathologically inferior. They're pathologically villainous. Like black men are pathologically rapists. They look to be violent. You know, black women are pathologically inferior and hypersexualized, right? And so they create this narrative that follows us, it feeds us, it creates this white supremacist sea that all of us are swallowing and ingesting. And so when I mean, like, I'm gonna be real with you. Like growing up as a black man, I wasn't until I was married that my wife drew me out of this. If I saw another black man, it was on sight. It was like, if you ain't from my hood, if you ain't from where I'm from, if I don't know you, then it's a problem, right? And so, and I had to unlearn that behavior because it was how I ingested white supremacy and self-hatred and anti-blackness in my own being.
Anybody else have something just want to add to that?
I would just add that, you know, it's the responsibility of all of us as Black people to take what they didn't give us in reference to education and knowledge. And we all have to understand that we all suffer, all of us, no matter how conscious, from the chains and images of psychological slavery. And if you look to the best of us, our scholars, they talk about this frequently, about the colonized mind that London mentioned earlier, about the psychological damage that we suffer from collectively of being stripped from our culture, of being stripped from our names, of being stripped from our images and religions and spiritual practices. I mean, we literally have been stripped down like no other people on the face of the earth, not the Jews through their Holocaust, not through anybody else, because our very way of being was transformed into a European way of being, right? So everything that we do, our language, the way that we view the world in many cases. I mean, I've got into physical fistfights with Black men over calling them Africans because they didn't want to be associated with where they come from. I don't know any other group of people on the planet that disassociate themselves from where they come from the way that Black Americans and Blacks in the West have been conditioned to do. So I would just invite us to learn as much as we can about who we are and where we come from, because the only way we can strip ourselves down and rebuild ourselves where we don't suffer from some of those whitewashing perspectives or those Europeanized perspectives is to understand who we are. And that's a process. Our kids suffer from it. We suffer from it. But the white man or the white society, which is governed by white supremacy, is not going to give it to us. They're going to continue to give us George Washington and Columbus and Lincoln. And our money is going to continue to have white men on the front of the dollar bills and 20s and 50s and 100s. And Jesus is still going to be white and all the angels are still going to be white. So they're not going to do it for us. We have to do it ourselves, and we have to take responsibility.
So I'm hearing that there needs to be an intentionality, and that's what I'm hearing from both of you guys, that there has to be an intentionality when it comes to actually, and it's not, you can't unlearn something without having something to replace it with. And since we've already been stripped of everything that was our inherent identity, we need to then begin to build ourselves up with a knowing and a learning of who it is that we are as a people culturally, and what our histories were or are prior to us. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, well, our history definitely didn't start in slavery. Like we didn't start in chains. We built the first universities. We built the first astrological systems, the first religions on the planet, and the information is there. But we were the first at everything, and that doesn't mean that we're better than anybody else. But we are the founders of modern day thought, and so we have to understand that so we can buy into that and embrace that the way that we're supposed to, so we can excel and rise up to the level that we're supposed to.
So I'm gonna pop it over. Anthony, I think that you have your you might have your sound up on your phone. If you're listening to it on social media, so you can turn that down, and then it won't be feedback. That's cool. So I'm gonna pop it to you, and then London, I wanted you, while he's after while he's sharing, I wanted you just to be thinking about, I know that there is a narrative that that we have that has been shaped around the Black man. Is there a narrative that has been framed or shaped around the Black woman or the Black incarcerated woman? So I just want you to just ponder that a little bit. Anthony, you came off mute. So was there something that you were going to just tap into or add to this piece?
I was going to think it was something I was carrying from earlier, but I think it also fits into this piece. One, just some knowledge of what was lifted up earlier. We have to get back to also that spiritual archive of knowing and learning, right? That ability to be free in the space as we was in ancient Kemet, right? Before it was even called Africa, right? Or RFR, right? Of just testing out nature, right? Because nature was our first Bible. Nature was our first teacher, right? So when they was following the path of the Nile, right? When they was looking up at the stars and they were stargazing and they was looking at Sothis and they was looking at Sirius and they was looking at all these different things, we were free enough in our space, in our recreational space, in our living quarters to experiment. We have to be careful in this modern day, right? When we talk about modern day slavery, then and now, part of that is we don't necessarily exercise and give ourselves enough capacity to exercise the freedom to experience what this Blackness is. Because I tell folks in 2020, I know for me, and I would be remiss and even challenge folks if they dare say otherwise, 2020 was the first year that I felt the audacity to fully express my Blackness ever in America. And I said, I just turned 40, right? So because it's always been a weighted down, right? It's never been just that freedom. And when we were at the top of acculturating the world, right? When the world was following our footsteps, we also was studying from nature as our first Bible, letting that be our teacher. We were also freer in spaces. Right now, what the challenge is, we're not free because we always depending on one of their processes. Even when we thinking we're out of their school of thought, we're grappling onto another vein or another tentacle of their school of thought, right? So I think we have to be mindful to get back to what that Black experimentation looked like, right? Because we are the most innovative, just like jazz, because we use that improvisation in our acculturation as we taught our children, children don't really play outside no more, right? So like they're not even experimenting as they're growing their imagination to see like what my environment is like, what does it feel like, right? So a part of like being a slave beyond that economic indentured servitude status, beyond that cheap labor, also a part of being enslaved is being so endemic, right? Being so confined in your environment, especially in your mental space, that you don't even take those chances and risk those things that it takes to be and maintain free, right? We have to practice freedom. We think it's something it's a given, right? Probably it's easily given, right? But it's hard to maintain, right? Hard to keep. That's why the Black, Black Reconstruction, the Freedmen's Bureau, like I say that the Freedmen's Bureau lasted for 1 year, right? 1 year. They put together a pot of funds to say, hey, you had this experience of slavery, help you, assist you, get you on your feet. And they didn't even invest in it, right? So that let us know from the gate, like where they thought we were at. So we kind of immediately seen that system as sharecropping, because like where are the slaves going to go? What are the institutions do you have? What do you have to? Oh, well, you can stay at the plantation and work for us. And we won't even call it that, right? That's that like slavery then and now. That's how they switch the game. Oh, we'll call it like you guys are just like working. And then we call it sharecrop. We call it something different. So with the sharecropping, then it went to convict leasing, then it went to, and now we're calling it something different. And we haven't really stood at the face of it. And so like, nah, stop right there. Like we're not allowing it to transform no more. We see you. We see what it is. We know we're not letting it get past us. We don't care what you call it. We don't care how you try to make it morph, right? We're not letting it get past us. And that's a decision we have to make as a culture, right? That's one of the things that anti-Blackness within ourselves, we have to bury that and go after that thing. We can't let this thing continue to get past us.
So in a sense, it almost goes back to what Ken was saying then, that so and what I'm hearing in my mind is, and we haven't used the word yet, which great, because if we do, I don't want it to take us in a whole nother lane. So this ain't a signal change. This is, but I haven't heard us yet use the term abolish. But I heard it in my mind that that we've been so conditioned to reform, transform, transition, that what we've not done successfully is abolish. and rebuild. I don't even want to know if we should say rebuild, build from the ground up, maybe not redo anything. But before I leave us in there, London, the narrative. So we've highlighted and lifted up the narrative that has been shaped historically when it comes to the Black man. Is there a narrative, or is there a dominant narrative that is now trending when it comes to the Black woman, especially the Black woman or the woman of color who is incarcerated?
Thank you for that. So I'm going to speak for just Black women in general, right? I feel like Black women, the way we show up, we've seen it just now with the presidential election, right? Kamala Harris having to tame herself. You know, we can't come across too aggressive. You know, she's angry. You know, the Black women, you know, we start twisting our neck and everything. We don't know how to submit, and all we just a headache, right? And so I I think that not only what's hard for the Black woman, in my opinion, this is just from my opinion, right? Is back to when, you know, I don't even want to say, right, Willie Lynch, because I feel like that could be a whole nother conversation, right? But we could see that the Willie Lynch letter is still, the practices still is trending, or whatever you want to use, you know, within our society now. So I think that what Black women face and everything, not only are we up against like the image of what white people think, like, you know, as far as, you know, with Black men too, the dark, you know, the darker you are, the uglier you are, right? Let's just say it flat out how they look at it, right? You know, how many times do you hear, like, sometimes our own people, like, we want to attach ourselves to a different race so much, like, oh, I'm mixed with this and that and everything like that. It's just because, to me, it's like that whole mental wash, right? But as Black women, I feel like we have to always be on guard about how we show up, you know, people not understanding why, you know, why we come across sometimes the way that we do, right? We don't have that luxury. A lot of Black women, it's not that we are, you know, they look at us as, you know, I say other races. I've heard white women say, like, you know, Black women are so strong and this, that, and the other, right? This whole narrative. But yes, we are very strong. But a lot of us, it's not that we want to be strong. The world forces us to be strong. The world forces us to be the world forces us to be on survival mode, right? You know, a lot of us are in a Black household. It's the women that are having, you know, our Black men are taken away from us. They're in prison. They're dead. And now, you know, they're stripping us from, you know, the female prison population is going up 700% in the last decade, right? And then not only that, it's really hard because we also we get it from our own Black men as well. You know, let's speak it like as it is. Like, you know, that term that I heard, I remember in prison, we didn't get it oftentimes to see videos and stuff, right? Mm-hmm. One time, you know, when you get to see a video, it's like a whole, like it's a party, like go grab your food bowl, etc., right? And I remember watching all these videos and all these hip hop songs is these trending songs, and we're looking at the video and I don't really see any Black women, right? They're all of a natural, you know, and then it was this whole saying, if it ain't foreign, it's boring, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that Black women, you know, oftentimes we don't even realize, like, we try to Europeanize ourselves. We try to, you know, straighten our hair, wear the long, you know, because we're trying to find that identity. Like we're forcing ourselves, like almost this thing of like fighting to find our beauty, our place in this world. And so, yeah, I know that's a little.
No, I mean, it's heavy. What you're saying is heavy. That's the only word that comes to mind. It's heavy. And it's heavy out as a Black woman. I'm sitting here, and as you're saying it, so I resonate with what you're saying so deep that it's heavy, period. There's no getting around it. And so is it the same process, Ken? Is that the same process that we take, though we re-educate ourselves, you know, in order to counter those narratives?
Well, it's tricky, right? Because once you educate yourselves and wake up, then we get into whether we can talk about those words that you mentioned about abolition, right? And what does abolition mean when you're talking about structural racism, right? There's another word that we don't like to talk about that, you know, a lot of our ancestors and people who came before us did talk about, and that's revolution. When you have revolution, you can't really talk about reform or fixing something or changing a law. You're talking about the deconstruction of a system that was built off your back and with the exploitation in mind. Capitalism and white supremacy is a system. And so as long as that system is still erect, as long as that house is still standing, then there's always going to be some form of structural racism. As long as we're not empowered economically, we'll never control our own collective destiny. We do have personal power, unlike our ancestors. That's why it's tricky to play on words with slavery, and we always have to explain it to people because I never wanted to become fashionable. All of us have privilege that our ancestors didn't.
Right.
They couldn't walk away or go to 7-Eleven or go smoke a cigarette or do any of the things take for granted on a daily basis. They would get beat and killed for walking 10 feet off the plantation, lynched, castrated, right? Raped. So I don't ever want to like mix up that trauma, right? We have a different type of trauma, right? We have a different type of trauma that we suffer from. It's still a trauma, but it's not exactly the same as our great-great-grandparents and grandmamas went through. And so I'm conscious of that because their DNA is in me and I feel it and I live it still, right? But we have to ask ourselves as a people whether abolition is what we really want, right? Or whether revolution is what we really want. And up until now, it's been a question we haven't been able to answer, which is why our destiny has been in another group of people's hands who have told us historically that they don't like us, right? But yet we still today are trying to convince them that our lives matter. Today, we're still trying to convince them that we're worthy. Today, we're still trying to convince them that we're smart enough. We're still trying to convince them that we should be economically on the same playing field as they, and that we should have entitlement to what they have entitlement to. And that can be a dangerous cycle when you're constantly chasing your own tail when you're dealing with a group of people that don't think the same way as we do. Like white supremacy does not think the same way about Black people as Black people want them to think. And that's not just for Black people. This is an international issue, right? Global white supremacy is an international issue that's dominated by white males, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant males, right? It's bigger than just Black people. It's about control. It's about domination. It's about supremacy. So, how do you fight supremacy? How do you fight the bully on the block? I mean, I don't know what hood everybody else came from, but when somebody that used to rob everybody their lunch money or something, usually they ended up dead before they made it to 30 because somebody put something on them. That's just from where I come from, right? So, we have to ask those serious questions about what that looks like, because just constantly having the same conversation decade after decade after decade, and then getting these little incremental changes that don't allow structural changes, because the reality is the ghettos look the same as they did 50 years ago. Right. East Oakland is no different than it was 40 years ago. South Central LA is no different than it was in the 70s. All of the places that we gather and live for the most part are still the same, despite 40 years of reform or law changes or affirmative action or civil, all the stuff that they said that they've given us. We still find ourselves in this popcorn machine. So it's just a serious question we have to ask ourselves. It's a look in the mirror kind of to ask what it is we're doing and what it is we want and what our long-term objective is. Is it to just exist in the white man's system, or is it to create our own system? Right? And what does that look like? I don't have the answer, but it's just something that we should think about.
This has been really, really good. So one, I'm taking a whole lot of notes. So and it's thoughtful and thought provoking. That's the other thing. So that's why it's so good. It feels like sitting at a table and actually having a very nourishing meal. This conversation, really, really, really rich. I wanted to ask a question, and so I wanted to ask the question. I've got a couple of questions for me, and I like learning, which is probably why this space is also good for me, is because I'm just innately curious. So I wrote down revelation, abolition, deconstruction. I jotted those terms down because I know that those are trigger words. Typically, when you hear people talk about those trigger words, they're very angry. And so they're yelling, and all of that. And so here's the reason why I'm saying that this is so good for me. First of all, I want to say thank you, Ken, and Marcel, because what I haven't done, and I'm like trying not to get emotional. What I haven't done, and I think that none of us have done, is to really stop and really be respectful to the trauma that our ancestors experienced through slavery. And so in this space today, it just made me really look at it and say, okay, we're saying modern day slavery, and we're saying that and likening what it is that we're going to as in parallel, you know, as the same, synonymous to what my ancestors, our ancestors went through, and that trauma was markedly different. So there are some similarities to the systemic structure, the patterns that are taking place. But what I am taking away is that what it is, the trauma we're dealing with now, as you said, Ken, it is traumatic. However, it's not the same trauma that our ancestors dealt with. And so I don't want to take my trauma and take away from that trauma. I receive that. I hear that.
Thank you.
I feel that. Yeah. And the other thing that I'm taking away from this as well is what I wanted to ask the question. How were you able to get where you are, and Marcel where you are, and Anthony where you are, in London where you are? How are you able to be here? And this wasn't even talked about in the prep. How are you able to get here not angry? Because I can't learn when you're angry. So and then this is the last question for you, London and Ken. I know you guys have to jump off, and then Anthony and Sarah will wrap it up. But so can I start with you two, since you guys have to pop out?
Well, I'll just say, I don't want to be too long, but I'll just say, I don't think there's anything wrong with being angry, because I think Black people are probably the nicest and most resilient people and forgiving people on the face of the earth. Because for what's happened to us in the last 400 or 500 years, a whole lot of people should have came up probably in a different state of being. So I will say that by nature, we're forgiving. By nature, we're loving and caring. We've demonstrated that. We don't have to prove that. Like, we've demonstrated that for 400 years. Like, we've forgiven and tolerated genocide.
How can you say that in spite of the narrative and all the stuff that we're seeing now? The fruit of what we're seeing now is not a reflection of what you're saying. And I'm not saying that on purpose.
I get you. Well, I think that we have to look at it in context. When you look at the collection of things that have happened to us since 1619, the fact that we haven't burnt this place down and done a whole lot of stuff in revenge in return to the people that have done it to us is a demonstration that we are forgiving, right? It's a demonstration that we're kind and a loving people, because we haven't destroyed people that have attempted to destroy us for 400 years. So that we've had a testimony, a living testimony that has demonstrated that. So we don't owe anybody any apologies, whether we're mad, angry, whatever, right? We've already forgiven you and demoed you for 400 years. So to me, that's off the table, right? We don't have any explanation to give. And so I think that it's good to be angry, but it's also good to channel anger, right? Because when you're just angry and you're destroying yourself, which is what we do to ourselves sometimes, when we don't channel that power into collective action, right? Because we got a lot of bodies and we have a lot of strength, but we don't oftentimes channel that in a way that brings the best result for ourselves. And I think that sometimes we should give pause and figure out ways to organize that anger better. I want us to remain angry. We should always remain angry when somebody harms us, when somebody takes away our child, our mother, our brother, our father, our uncle, our auntie, our grandmama. We have a right to be angry at that, especially when it's done by people who have disregard for our lives. But I would just say that we need to find better ways, or more effective ways is probably a better way, to channel that anger. So that way we can get some results and some freedom for ourselves, because ultimately we all want to be free. And I'm not talking about from prison. I'm talking
Right.
about the freedom to be African, the freedom to be Black, the freedom to have economic livable conditions, the freedom to study the religions and books and sciences and poetry that we want to do without being subjected to this bullshit that white supremacy serves us on a regular basis.
London?
Yeah, so I'm definitely can't hop off of this call till I hear everybody else's answer, right? Because you know, I don't have a picturesque answer for that. Like, I can't even explain how I didn't become honestly angry at the things that I've been through and the things that I see. Honestly, I'm at a place in my life right now, and I'm going to say this. I would like to be vulnerable because I want other people, especially other Black sisters and brothers, who to encourage them to find their identity, to find their place in this world. And so I feel like I'm in that season in my life where it's a real struggle for me because I feel like the veil has been taken off my eyes, right? It's you know, ignorance is bliss. And so I have constantly now, like, I feel like I'm going through this whole identity change, right? Trying to figure out, how does London want to show up in the world? Because for so long or whatever, I was, you know, I had that colonized mind. I was totally, I'm going to, you know, take that, you know, speak honesty on that. You know, I was doing that, trying to fit in with the image of what I thought, what the world made me feel like was beautiful, how I should be acting, how I should be talking, all those things. And so, and now that the veil is off, it's like, whoa, wait a minute, you know, it's like, it's just coming at me so many, honestly, in different angles that I'm in constant prayer. I'm in constant meditation. I'm constantly asking God to protect my heart. It's a constant thing for me right now. And it's still, and so just to be totally transparent, I'm still figuring it out. And prayer and having, honestly, these conversations, having, you know, my community, you know, having women like you in my life, having, you know, being surrounded by Black kings, you know, like this, having my sister Ebony on the chat, you know, being able to have a space where I can, you know, vent and talk to and gain some understanding, some insight, and like, hey, you know, whatever that looks like. That is honestly what helps me to, like Ken said, there is anger, but I'm trying to let my anger not take over me and fuel it and use it to empower me and empower my people. Like, that's where I feel like my existence is now, my purpose on this earth is. And so, again, I'm still figuring it out, though.
Ebony, we see you. We love you too, sis. Well, I appreciate you guys for real. And so I know you guys need to tap out. And I don't want to
gotta hear
you.
Anthony and Cell's answer.
Yeah, okay, look.
This
is how we ending it tonight, y'all. So we just wrapping it up right here.
I'll let you close, Anthony. All right. All right. So the question was, how do we not be mad, and how can we show up in this space? Is that what the question was? I think of that James Baldwin quote where he says, you know, to be Black and relatively conscious in America is to be always in a state of rage. Like, I am mad, right? I am enraged. I mean, and you know that because I go through things, and you have to call me back, because in my pain and my anger, I will disappear. But I think that I can show up in this space because I'm liberated, right? I know that my anger and my rage doesn't have to show up the way that the slavers did, and through beatings and through murder and through the domination of people's bodies. It can show up through love. That's why I give my whole heart, my whole life to my community, right? I'm with kids. I've buried over 150 young people. You know, I mean, I'm still here, right? And so it's that rage, that showing the love that keeps me here.
Anthony, you want me to go first so that you can close it up? So for me, what came to mind is that my anger, I feel like it, I can drown in it. You know, it's in the saltiness of my tears. For real. I mean, like, and so my curiosity, is what helps me. My desire to be inquisitive, to always adapt. I kind of liken myself unto a chameleon. So I try to adapt, to the circumstances and the things that are coming at me. But I'm always asking questions of Abba Father. Why? Well, why is it like this? And I don't believe that. I don't believe that God is intimidated by my questions and my curiosity. I believe that God is big enough to deal with my doubt and my challenging, and all of that stuff, and it helps me to see His realness, His existence, and sovereignty. And I kind of resonate deeply also, with what my brother said. The fact that I haven't burnt anything up, blow anything up, taken anybody's life, just it's not. Those are things, you kind of get scared to hear and to talk about, but I don't know. I don't know. I can say all these poetic things, but at the end of the day, it has got to be just the higher existent power of God, um, and His Spirit that sits on me, um, in those moments, in those pockets, to where I feel like the rage and the anger, they exceed my capacity to actually breathe. So I'm always angry. I'm always pissed off. I'm always upset. I'm always deeply hurt. I'm always crying. I'm always weeping. Um, always feel like a mother who has lost a child. For every child, I mean, man, I could just go on and on as far as the mourning, the travailing, the wailing, the weeping, the grieving. Anthony?
I say. Well, I agree with what Sale kicked off from what he started. Like, don't get it confused. Like, what you don't see is a masked anger, right? But for me, in my experience of trying to hold anger while walking through a 20-year prison sentence, was man, like Karen, that is draining, right? So I became strategic as I started to understand my initiation as an Egyptian Freemason, right? Or just dealing with that kinetic metaphysics. What we call emotions is also a condition of for when I said that Western component or that white supremacy, and folks like, what do you mean, right? Because what we're labeling emotions, I come to understand is just energies in motion. So this thing that we're identifying with as anger is also one of those ancestral attributes of aggression, right? Of that protector spirit, of that wrath off. Like, how are you Black in America, right? And really expressing that, just existing, right? Even if you just was trying to just leave folks alone and not be angry, right? That like I would go get that. So all the stuff that's heaped up on us, we express it and we lash out because we don't have that container, so to speak, or we don't have that energy or that acceptable release. So I would really lift up, and I love Seth for kicking that off, and folks that understood that in their experience, like, yeah, like unapologetically, like we don't have to apologize for anger. But I think for me, in my experience, I've learned to turn anger into indignation, right? And not this self-righteousness, but a real indignation, right? Because that's also a spiritual component, right? So when I think about all of my mentors and my ancestors that really carried and helped me navigate through my 20-year experience, the Bookmans, right? The Plessis, Nat Turners, right? The George Jacksons, all these folks that white supremacy would label as angry, right? Like in prison, it was against the law to own a George Jackson book because he was labeled as this revolutionist, so angry, this big demon. It's like, wait a minute, how are they writing a law? Well, we can't get books and literature, and we can't learn from our ancestors. We can't learn from our wisdom keepers and our elders as passing down a spiritual experience, right? Because I'm a writer, so I understand writing is the most intimate form of communication. It's a spiritual thing, right? We understand it from like the spiritual books. But like, let's be clear, like the universal creator didn't stop there. We're still getting these divine revelations, the divine inspirations when we circle up, when we get in these spaces, right? So it's very important to understand that one of the things that allowed me to kind of code shift my strategy, right? When I understood the Ho Chi Minh quote, I had to basically reserve my anger and bottled it up into a vision. And that's what carried me through that 20 years in prayer. That's what allowed me not to where I thought, because God was like, hey man, like you the vessel, you got to make it out, right? You have to make it out, right? So turn your anger into indignation and just watch and just study and just wait. Because when the prison door opens, the real dragon will fly out. But right now, while you're in this environment, you have to tuck your wings. You have to make your wing fit into this confined space, right? And it's very strategic in how you have to map that thing out, right? Can you imagine the expand of a dragon's wings? And like you say, that's what God has already brought us forth to, right? Right now, we're in the season 2021. For us, it's going to be the season of the dragon. For the Black folks to really bring that dragon out of you to really get free. Because if we don't do it, like you say, how many times we going to get on these cars and do this stuff, right? We have to come with unapologetic strategy that's not asking for permission from outside folks, right? That's letting them know what it is, right? That's not like, so we come together and we circle up and we have to basically submit our work, right? To other folks. MIT, is this okay? Can we do this? Is this evidence-based? UOP, all these other, right? And it's like when we understand and get tired of that shit, they'll get really ready to like hear us. When we say, hey, this is what we own. Right? We came together, we circled up, and our institutions weren't up because y'all got it from us, right? How dare we have to turn back our work that they didn't stole from us to their institutions for their approval, where they know that they're already against us. That makes no sense. We have to wake up, right? That's what anti-Black looks like in ourselves. Like, wake up to that shit. Like, that makes no sense. That's not even a strategy, right? We have to turn in work that they didn't stole from us, right? That we trying to copy a cheap book that don't work and turn it back into them for permission, right? To get a glance or a peek at our stuff, right? If we don't do anything else, we like, man, like I try to be outside on most of these calls, not for like aesthetics, because we have to connect back to nature, right? They're closing the institution where they stole the knowledge and they hid it from us, right? We have to connect back to nature, if anything, because it's an intuitive thing that had our ancestors really going about that way. How else did the slave break their chains without no book? They connected to that beyond themselves. So I think that's one of the things that we have to allow for more space in. And one of the things that we have to really invite in is watch the youth. Because the youth hasn't been so colonized that spiritual component is not broken out of them. Right now, they're behaving in ways because they don't have no platform. They don't have like we've expressed the call, all this stuff. So their behavior components is like, okay, they lost their mind, right? But now that's that energy. That's that energy not giving that proper space to really project itself in a positive outcome, right? So the energy is going to express itself positively or negatively, because it has to express us what it does. Youth for energy exists to express itself. If we don't start strategically understanding, like, oh, you guys have a place in the movement too, and take it serious. You have a serious place in it. I know funsies when we can get funny. You have a serious place in the movement to express that energy, because every movement has to have a vanguard. If we're really marching and if we're moving forward to this freedom march, we have to understand how we've stratified and how we position ourselves and how we've invited other folks into the ranks, right? And how we're using all our folks. Because the enemy's using everyone we don't use, the enemy gonna use against us. I understood that in prison. So I was telling him, bro, hey man, go get the dope in. Don't beat that brother up. Because the enemy, everyone we don't use, the enemy gonna use against us. And we already outnumbered, we already out-resourced, we already out-technologized, and all these other fancy words, right? So we need to start getting back to that. That's the spiritual component. We got to understand, have such a deep love for ourselves. What George Jackson say? He said the new medium of exchange, right? We off money, we off capital. The new medium of exchange for us is going to be love and loyalty. That's how we're going to get free.
Ashe? I'm like, I'm gonna have to find out what that means. I said, Anthony, because you say it, and when you say it, I know, I feel it, and I don't even know what it is that you're saying, and I feel it. So now I'm like, okay. Okay, so man, this has been good. Like I said, I really am. I'm like, this has been good. This has been very rich. I'm gonna have to go back and lean in deep in order to take even more notes. So just as a note for those that tap in and those that come in and watch this after this Saturday. we've been just sharing. We're going to have an anti-Black conversation that is a continuance. This is a series. You want to say something, Ken?
No, I just want to tell you, Ashe means
Be with us. Ashe.
It's a Shanti word. Thank you.
Be with us. So we have an anti-Black conversation this Saturday at 11 a.m. and it is part 2 to the first conversation that is centered around life. This is around the revolving door, and it is gentlemen that that spent 15 to 20 plus years in and out, in and out, in and out. And so they'll be just lifting up, some of the things that that were helpful to them, as they were transitioning. And so I got lost because I was looking for right words. But also some of the stigma and some of the things that were causing some of the hurdles, I'll put it like that, obstacles. Is that the right word, Anthony? Yes. Some of the obstacles that they would hit, the roadblocks that they would hit, not actually being out of the system, not even having a number that isn't associated to you until you're off of parole, and different things. And so there's going to be some things that are going to be lifted up and shared in that space that I really, really am grateful that we get to share space with them and hear about. In the meantime, I appreciate y'all. I love y'all. Thank you for being in the space. And so I'm gonna step back. Is there anything that is like burning that you want to just leave or share or say before we tap out this evening?
Gratefulness. That's all I want to say. Grateful for the space that you all afforded us today to have this conversation. Thank you, Anthony, Sel, London, and Tony.
Yeah, it's a pleasure meeting you guys and speaking with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, London. I cannot. I tell you, I appreciate you so much. Yeah, I've learned a lot, and I'm so grateful. I am so grateful.
I'm full of gratitude as well. Let's keep on having these conversations and educating our people, right? And that's where it starts at, right? We got to have that awakening and remind each other where we originate from. And also, Anthony, I don't want to go on a tangent, but Anthony, go ahead.
I wanted to really just remind folks and really just infuse, especially those folks watching, man, we are the ones we've been waiting for, right? Like really get that into your understanding. Like if you do not believe and understand that you can change the world, what are you doing in it, right? We can no longer afford to go to those folks that are waiting to learn from us. Like imagine that the folks that count on and got it from us is going to reteach you because they view it as like stealing it back from us, if that makes sense, right? So just understand, like, man, we are the ones we've been waiting for.
Right. All right. So God bless. Good night, everybody. Love you. Peace.
Ashe.